Last year, someone I know opened their banking app on a Sunday night. Nothing was wrong. No gambling, no bad investments, no reckless spending. Their savings account was higher than it had ever been. And yet, they closed the app feeling anxious because their rent had gone up again. Their groceries cost more than last month, and one unexpected bill would still ruin their week. That's when it hit me. What if the biggest financial mistake isn't taking risks, but being told your entire life that you're not allowed to take any? Because if playing it safe really worked, why do the safest people feel the most fragile? My name is John, and I don't make these videos to tell you how to get rich fast. I make them because I've watched too many normal, responsible people do everything they were told and still feel financially trapped. This channel isn't about beating the market. It's about understanding the rules of the game we're all forced to play. Because today's topic isn't really about investing. It's about something much quieter and much more dangerous. The belief that safety means standing still. Most of us were taught the same lesson early on. Save your money, avoid risk, don't mess up. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Money doesn't exist in a vacuum. While your savings sit still, the world around them keeps moving. Prices rise, rent creeps up, healthcare gets more expensive, time passes whether your money grows or not. So when we say something is safe, we usually mean one thing only. The number on the screen doesn't go down. But that's a dangerously incomplete definition, because there are different kinds of risk. There's the risk of volatility numbers going up and down, and then there's the risk no one talks about. The risk of slowly losing your ability to live the same life. This video is about that second kind. The kind that doesn't feel scary in the moment. The kind that doesn't trigger panic. The kind that feels responsible, right up until you realize it's boxed you in. Today we're going to break this down step by step. We'll talk about why inflation acts like a silent tax. Why our brains are wired to fear visible losses more than invisible ones. Why the system rewards certain kinds of risk, but only if you already have a cushion. And why being too careful can quietly cost you decades. Most importantly, we'll talk about what real safety actually looks like. Not in theory, but in real life. For people who can't afford to mess up. This isn't financial advice, it's financial clarity. Because once you understand the trap, you stop blaming yourself for being stuck inside it. Let's start with the word we keep using without questioning it. Safe. Ask 10 people what safe money means, and you'll hear the same answer in different forms. Money that doesn't go down. Money that doesn't surprise you. Money that lets you sleep at night. Usually that means a savings account. And I get why, I really do. When life already feels unstable, jobs, health, rent, the future, the idea of your money not moving feels comforting. It feels like control. But here's the problem. Safety is being defined by a single moment in time. You open your banking app, you see the same number as yesterday. Nothing is on fire, so your brain says, good, we're safe. But safety isn't about whether something explodes today. It's about whether it quietly weakens you over time. Imagine two bridges. One looks calm, no movement, solid concrete. The other sways a little in the wind. Most people would choose the first bridge without hesitation. But what if I told you the calm bridge is slowly sinking, and the moving one was designed to flex, adjust, and survive storms? That's what's happening with money. We've been trained to fear movement more than direction. A savings account feels safe because it doesn't move, but it also doesn't adapt. It doesn't care that rent goes up. It doesn't care that groceries cost more. It doesn't care that healthcare inflation runs faster than your paycheck. It just sits there. So when people say, at least I didn't lose money, what they usually mean is, I didn't see it leave. But loss doesn't need an exit notification. Loss can happen quietly through shrinking choices. You stop considering certain neighborhoods. You delay medical appointments. You put off taking time off because one bad month would hurt too much. Nothing dramatic happened. No financial disaster. Just a life that slowly narrowed. And this is the cruel irony. The people who are the most careful with money are often the ones who feel the least secure. Not because they did something wrong, but because they were taught that the absence of volatility meant the presence of safety, and those are not the same thing. Inflation is one of those words everyone recognizes, but almost no one feels until it's already done its damage. Because inflation doesn't look like theft. No one sends you a notice. No one asks for permission. Nothing disappears overnight. You still have the same number in your account, but that number slowly starts to mean less. 3% doesn't sound scary, neither does 4. It sounds polite, manageable, almost harmless. But here's what those numbers actually do. At 3% inflation, your money loses roughly half its purchasing power in about 24 years. At 4%, it happens even faster. That means if you're 30 today, money you plan to use in your 50s is already on a countdown clock. And here's the part that messes with people's heads. Inflation doesn't punish recklessness, it punishes stillness. If you spend irresponsibly, you feel it immediately. If you make a bad investment, you feel it immediately. But if you do nothing, if you play it safe, the cost is delayed, and delayed pain is the easiest pain to ignore. This is why inflation works like a silent tax. A regular tax shows up on a paycheck. You notice it, you complain about it. Inflation shows up in small decisions. You buy a slightly cheaper brand, you go out a little less, you push a purchase to next year. None of these feel dramatic, but stacked over decades, they quietly change the shape of your life. The worst part? Inflation hits hardest where people are already vulnerable. If you own assets, property, businesses, stocks, prices rising often help you. If you rely mostly on wages and cash savings, prices rising just mean life costs more. Same inflation, two very different experiences. And this is where the system gets uncomfortable. We tell people with the least margin for error to avoid risk at all costs. We tell them to keep their money safe. We tell them not to gamble with their future. But inflation gambles with them anyway. Every year they don't grow their money, they're effectively paying a tax for being careful. Not because they're irresponsible, not because they're lazy, but because they were taught that money standing still was neutral. It isn't. Standing still is a position, and in a world that keeps moving forward, it's a losing one. At this point, a reasonable question comes up. If inflation slowly eats away at savings, and if standing still is clearly dangerous in the long run, why do so many smart, hardworking people still avoid anything that feels risky? The answer isn't a lack of intelligence, it's biology. Your brain is not designed to optimize for wealth. It's designed to keep you alive. Thousands of years ago, losing something you already had was often fatal. A bad hunt, a broken tool, a poor decision. So our brains evolved to treat losses as emergencies. Gains, on the other hand, were optional. That wiring never went away. Today, when you see an investment dip even temporarily, your brain reacts the same way it would have reacted to danger. Heart rate up, stress hormones firing, an urge to make it stop. But when inflation slowly erodes your purchasing power, there's no alarm. Nothing looks broken. The loss is invisible. So your brain shrugs and moves on. This is why people fear market volatility more than decades of quiet decline. One feels like falling, the other feels like standing still, and standing still feels safe. There's also something else at play. Most financial messaging aimed at regular people is built on fear. Don't mess up. Don't lose what you have. Don't take chances. Because from the system's perspective, caution is predictable. Predictable workers show up on time. They don't take risks. They don't demand flexibility. They don't step out of line. Fear keeps things orderly. And once fear becomes your default setting, you start confusing comfort with safety. You choose options that minimize short-term discomfort even if they guarantee long-term stress. You accept shrinking choices today to avoid the possibility of visible loss tomorrow. That's what safe loss really is. It's choosing a slow, quiet decline over a future that includes uncertainty. And again, this isn't stupidity. This is what happens when a system trains people to believe that any mistake is unforgivable. If you're one paycheck away from trouble, you don't fear being poor in 30 years. You fear being poor next month. So you cling to certainty, even when certainty is expensive. The tragedy is that this mindset often locks people into the very insecurity they're trying to avoid. Not because they chose badly, but because they were never taught to distinguish between risk that hurts immediately and risk that hurts eventually. And only one of those is truly dangerous. Here's where this stops being just psychology and starts getting uncomfortable. Because risk doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a system. And in that system, not everyone is allowed to take risks equally. Think about two people. The first one has savings, assets, and a safety net. If they make a bad investment, it hurts, but it doesn't break them. They can wait, they can recover, they can try again. Risk for them is flexible. Now think about someone else. They live paycheck to paycheck. Their margin for error is thin. One mistake doesn't slow them down, it knocks them over. For them, risk feels dangerous. Not because risk is inherently evil, but because the consequences are immediate. So what advice does the system give each group? To the first group, quietly and indirectly take risks. Invest, grow, leverage time. To the second group, loudly and repeatedly be careful. Don't mess up, don't gamble with your future. Same economy, same inflation. Very different rules. And this is the trap. People with less are told to avoid risk entirely. But avoiding risk doesn't remove danger, it just changes its shape. Instead of volatility, they face stagnation. Instead of short-term losses, they face long-term erosion. They're not protected from harm, they're protected from movement. And movement is how you escape. This is why phrases like just invest feel so insulting to people who are struggling, because it ignores the reality of their situation. It's easy to talk about long-term growth when you can afford short-term discomfort. It's much harder when your financial life has no shock absorbers. So people do what makes sense. They choose certainty. They choose predictability. They choose options that won't blow up their week. And the system benefits from that choice, because a population trained to fear mistakes is a population that stays in place. They keep working, they keep consuming, they keep paying higher prices as time goes on, and they blame themselves when it gets harder. But here's the truth that almost never gets said out loud. The problem isn't that people with less are too scared. The problem is that they were never given safe ways to take risk. No buffer, no education, no forgiveness for early mistakes. Just a warning, don't screw this up. So they don't. And over decades, that caution cost them far more than any single bad decision ever could. So what do you do with all of this? Because at this point, it would be easy to feel discouraged. Or worse, to feel like the message is, you should have done better. That's not the point. The point is not to become fearless. It's to stop being defenseless. Real financial safety doesn't come from avoiding all risk. It comes from structuring risk so it can't ruin your life. That starts with a shift in how we think about money. Instead of labeling money as safe or risky, it helps to give money roles. One role is survival. This is the money that keeps the lights on: rent, food, transportation, basic stability. This money's job is not to grow. Its job is to buy you time. That's why even a small emergency fund matters so much. A few $100s doesn't make you rich, but it can stop a minor problem from becoming a financial disaster. It prevents overdraft fees. It prevents high-interest debt. It gives you breathing room. And breathing room changes how risk feels. The second role is stability. This is money that protects you from obvious shocks: job loss, medical bills, short-term disruptions. It's boring on purpose, but it's not meant to be everything. The mistake people make is trying to force all their money to do the job of stability, and that leaves nothing left for the third role: growth. Growth money is not gambling money. It's money you deliberately expose to uncertainty because uncertainty is the price of long-term progress. This is where time works for you instead of against you. And here's the key part that rarely gets emphasized. Growth doesn't require bravery. It requires limits. You don't need to risk everything. You need to risk something you can recover from. That might mean starting small. It might mean accepting that short-term dips are not emergencies. It might mean focusing on consistency instead of perfection. The goal isn't to win big. The goal is to stop losing quietly. Another important shift is redefining what safe actually means. Safety isn't about whether your account balance ever drops. Safety is about whether your future options expand or shrink over time. If your choices get narrower every year, that's not safety, that's fragility. Finally, there's a mindset change that matters more than any tactic. You don't need to outperform anyone. You don't need to beat the market. You don't need to become a financial expert. You just need to stop letting fear make all the decisions. Because fear is expensive, not all at once, but slowly, predictably, over decades. And once you see that, you realize this was never about being reckless. It was about being allowed to move forward. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this video, it's this: you are not bad with money. You didn't fail because you weren't aggressive enough, or smart enough, or disciplined enough. In many ways, you did exactly what you were told. You played it safe. You avoided mistakes. You tried not to mess things up. And the problem is that the world changed around that advice. Prices rose faster than wages. Security became more expensive. Standing still stopped being neutral. So if you've ever felt like you're doing everything right but still falling behind, that's not a personal flaw. That's a mismatch between the rules you learned and the game you're actually in. Real financial safety isn't about never seeing a red number. It's about having room to breathe. room to adapt, room to recover. It's about understanding that some risks are loud but temporary, while others are quiet and permanent. And the most dangerous one of all is believing you're protected just because nothing is moving. So don't aim to be perfect. Don't aim to be fearless. Aim to be resilient. Because wealth isn't just about how much money you have on paper. It's about how many choices you have in real life. And I want you to be wealthy in life, not just on paper. If this helped you see your situation differently, share it with someone who's been blaming themselves for being behind. And if you want more videos like this, subscribe. Because understanding the system is the first step to finally stepping out of its traps.